we'll discuss the difference between Wildspace and the unknown regions and why the former was so deadly on today's video. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another upload. Hope everyone is doing well. So we've done a ton of videos on this channel all about the unknown regions, but surprisingly, we've covered Wildspace, the associated region, a whole lot less. And I know what you're wondering, well, what even is the difference between Wildspace and the unknown regions? And that's a great question, and it actually depends on whether we're talking Star Wars Legends or canon, i.e. the current lore or the prior expanded universe content. For now, we're going to stick with how things were, but I'll also explain the difference. So, as the Essential Atlas points out, Wildspace, like the unknown regions, is not a formal government label for a part of the galaxy. Rather, it's a name which refers generally to the galactic fringe, any territory with negligible colonization or industrial development. Thus, the definition of Wildspace by necessity changed as the galaxy became more and more colonized, with the borders being pushed back ever further. This is distinct from, say, the Outer Rim territories, which is a defined region of space with borders. What's interesting when looking at the Outer Rim versus Wildspace or the unknown regions is that in the last 1,000 or so years of the Republic, their control and authority over the Outer Rim began to falter, something that remained true into the Imperial era and beyond, so the distinctions between Wildspace and the Outer Rim definitely become a bit blurred. Both parts of the galaxy are frequently home to smugglers or illicit operations, pirates, whomever, operating under the lesser government scrutiny. The difference seems to be more remoteness, and the Essential Atlas explains this point while also contrasting Wildspace with the unknown regions. The distinction between Wildspace and the unknown regions is a simple one. Wildspace has been explored, however minimally, with the findings recorded in official logs, while the unknown regions have not. The worlds of Wildspace largely ignore the central galactic government, and while many of these worlds are peaceful, others are havens for fugitives, and its orbital bodies are riddled with bootlegger tunnels, smuggler hideaways, and stashes of pirate loot. The unknown regions have a rich grip on the public imagination, the term describing all areas that have never been directly surveyed by Republic or Imperial scouts. Again, that's the explanation for Star Wars Legends. In canon, it's actually the exact opposite. Either way, the distinction is sometimes a false one, especially in the post-Imperial era, as the galaxy has made contact with forces like the Chiss Ascendancy, for example. The Chiss Ascendancy have mapped their space and later do share that information with the New Republic, so presumably that does kind of move them out of the unknown regions, but there ends up kind of just being a dividing line in the sand. So what makes Wildspace so deadly, and what are some examples? Well, we talked about it in that little blurb there. Wildspace was largely without the oversight of the Republic or the Empire. That meant that it was an ideal place for nefarious persons to operate, and with Wildspace more fully mapped and with those maps being more easily available, there's an attractiveness there that's just not present in the unknown regions. I would also guess that the population of the area was also significantly higher, maybe not overall, because the unknown regions actually contains just so much, everything beyond the edge of the galaxy, including the satellite galaxies, but proportionally Wildspace, I'm guessing, would have more people. From a galactic geography standpoint, Wildspace also ends up generally being the space immediately outside the Outer Rim, with the exception of the Galactic West, which is typically labeled the unknown regions. That part is true in canon. If you're wondering why there's vast swaths of the galaxy completely colonized while others are unknown, even relatively close to the core, it comes down to the placement of natural hyperspace lanes, as I've explained in prior videos, as well as changing attitudes towards galactic exploration and shifting demographic. That's not to say Wildspace had no notable planets. Like the unknown regions, there was stuff going on if you knew where to look. The most famous and later influential Wildspace planet was probably Bakura. Bakura also stands as a really good example of why Wildspace is so dangerous. So Bakura was a relatively important planet, especially in the production of repulsor lifts. However, it also had a long-standing rivalry with the sea Ruvi, an aggressive, warlike dinosaur species which found their home in the unknown regions, but later expanded into Wildspace. Bakura was so isolated that the Empire had barely a token defense force there, and almost immediately after the Battle of Endor, the sea Ruvi launched a massive invasion, hoping to enslave the planet. And it was that distance from Coruscant which allowed them to believe they could do so without facing the wrath of the Empire, who, to be fair, they also did negotiate with, and the Rebel Alliance. The Rebels were only able to respond because their fleet was relatively close, still repairing itself over the Battle of Endor. The fact that Bakura was so close to Endor, well, the latter is usually classified as a part of the Outer Rim, really reinforces that one of the key factors here is isolation. Endor is more central, there are more important systems in nearby areas, while Bakura is relatively isolated and it's difficult to get there. Another well-known Wildspace planet, and one which represented, albeit a different type of danger, was Adumar. Adumar you'll visit most prominently in Starfighters of Adumar, the novel in the X-Wing series, but it was so isolated, the planet and its citizens developed an extreme penchant for the military and specifically starfighter pilots, revering both fighter and craft. The planet Weak was itself so isolated in Wildspace that it essentially reverted to a feudal, low technology status, to the point where the planet lost its technology, lost its history, and without outside contact with the galaxy was really struggling to survive. On a different note, completely different note, the Eternal Empire is also heavily connected to Wildspace. Zakul, their homeworld, was in the region, although I'm not an Old Republic guy, so that's way outside my knowledge. I'm not even going to try. Otherwise, when you look into the area, you see prisons, Imperial facilities, smuggling dens, and really, you should have a picture of what Wildspace was like in Star Wars Legends. A place where you could go to likely escape the authority or ire of the Empire or Republic, but where you also had to deal with the immense isolation of your distance from civilization. I'm talking resource scarcity, being subject to pirates or tyrants in the area, or simply getting lost or stranded. Again, in canon, it's a little bit different, where Wildspace is really the land far beyond the edge of the map, where really, who knows what's out there. Anyway, that's my discussion on the topic for now. I definitely will cover more if there's a specific Wildspace story or species, event, whatever you'd like me to cover. Let me know down below, but that's all I've got for today. See you next time.